guys, I am the rookie, so.
All right, and I will be sure to send the slides as well, and we can follow up with her if she has any questions.
Okay. Thank you.
And then I believe I see Kira and some other folks with us. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Go ahead, Kara. I'm Donna Fishman. I'm with Prevent Blindness National with Kira. I'm the director of the National Center for Children's Vision and Eye Health. Happy
Thanks
to be
so
here.
much. And Kira, I know I see you. If you're having any trouble with audio, definitely see that you are with us. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. Just to review our agenda, I wanted to do just an overview kind of like some timeline changes since the project did launch a bit later than we were anticipating, and make sure everyone is kind of on the same page. Also just give an update on practices and status, talk a bit about data, because I know we got some information from ODH on data requests, and then talk about what we've heard as we've talked to some practices about that. I had a quick Form K question, and then we'll talk about some next steps. Oh, let me see. Oh, there's Kira. Totally understand. I have done that myself. So as you know, the project really officially began in December. We were expecting it to start a bit earlier than that, so I think it's shifted some things, and I am going to update the official kind of timeline that we have. But with that shift, really January, February, March, we've been working on onboarding practices, getting their modules and education completed, getting the site training scheduled and completed, completing pre-work assessments, and starting that sort of planning around data, actual data reporting, which for many of these practices can be quite a challenge or can take a bit of time to really get set up. So I think in the shifting of the timeline, those are some things that to kind of keep in mind. March through June is really going to be kind of that action period where we're hoping to start collecting or see data, work with the practices on workflows and PDSAs. And then June, I believe, will be when our final report is due. July, although I know the program will officially be over, we will expect to do exit interviews, get a final data submission to get everything through the end of June, and then give a final report addendum. So are there any comments on kind of that overview of sort of the shifting timeline? Okay. If not, like I said, we have an official sort of timeline document that I will update to reflect that and share that with the group. And this is my slide just to kind of summarize where we are with practices. I'm actually going to go to the next slide though, because I want to just go over the practices that we've lost through the process. And I think part of this was, if you remember, we did quite a bit of recruiting sort of mid to late summer, and got a great response. I think we were around 17 or 18 practices, and we actually picked up a couple after that. But sadly, we've had a lot of practices who dropped out or whom we've had a bit of a challenge getting communication going with. So unfortunately, most of them we lost due to staffing shortages and critical staffing issues. And I know for anyone who's been working with practices over the last several months, that has been a really serious challenge. We had actually started with Christ UC Family Medicine residency, but they did drop out of the project again, citing those staffing issues. There's a few practices at the bottom of the slide that you can see that I'm still communicating with to actually see if they're going to formally follow through with participating in the practice. The other Christ Hospital practice, I feel like they're probably the most likely one to do the project of the 5 that are listed there. So to go back to the active practices that we have, this just kind of gives you an overview of them, where they are in terms of completing modules, site visit scheduling, the number that will be certified at the practice, kind of where we are with data, and that is checking with them on that request from ODH on data that they would like to see in the project, which I'll get to in a moment. I'll put that on a slide. And then just some other information on their location. As I mentioned with Dayton Children's, we did the site visit yesterday. I actually believe we may have certified more than 7. I think we had 9 folks who were there, David. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
And I think as we were talking to them, it really does sound like they're going to be doing the project at 2 sort of separate brick and mortar sites. The additional site being the Hope Center. So I'm going to get some more information about the staffing there. But I think that would actually count as 2 separate sites, and we would probably need to get data from both of those sites as well. The other practices that we have currently scheduled and are moving along on their modules are the CLPCP. That one is coming up on March 3rd, Rainbow Pediatrics Euclid, Peds on Wheels, and Rainbow Chardon has actually given us their contact list. We're missing 2 providers. As soon as I get those, David will be able to get them going on their modules. And then the 3 others, I'm still working on scheduling and getting email lists from, which I know they're lagging behind where we would like them to be. But again, many of these practices have been struggling with staffing, and things are just taking a longer than I think they would anticipate. So any questions in general about this list of practices? All right, if not, I'll move on to data. Just as a reminder, this is really the type of EMR data pool that we used in the previous waves of the project. And I think as we initially launched, this was sort of what we thought we would be doing for this wave. This slide represents the data request. I think it's been a couple of weeks ago that ODH asked for the project. I've put out some feelers with the practices on the feasibility of this. And I think that for some of them, this might be possible, although I don't know if it would be possible to pull this monthly. It may be something that they would be able to give us toward the end of the project, particularly because of the sort of shortened timeline of things. I think for some practices, for example, Peds on Wheels, when I reviewed this with them, they said there would really be no way that they could give us all of this data. So I just kind of wanted to talk about what some options or possibilities would be for practices that wouldn't be able to report all of this, and see what we might be able to do, if folks have any thoughts or ideas.
Kristen,
Kristen,
what
did
was
they
some
specifically
of the
say which
challenge?
ones? Sorry.
Oh, I'm
Go ahead.
sorry.
No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Z. Go ahead.
Kristen, did they say which specific aspects were going to be difficult to pull?
I think the ethnicity type of data was going to be difficult for them. I mean, I think some of the data that's more similar to what we had pulled in previous waves would probably work for them, but some of this more kind of detailed type of data, they felt like would be difficult. Now, the 2 other practices that I just sort of piloted this with was Dayton Children's. They've given this to their IT department, and they're trying to work through being able to provide this. So I'm supposed to get an update probably later this week from their office manager on that. And then the other practice that was checking into it was the CLPCP practice.
Okay.
Is this something that might be revisited once we have input for more participating practices?
Yeah, I am assessing it with each practice. So I'm sharing it with each of the practices to see you know, what the feasibility is. It may be, my sense is the ethnicity data might be the most challenging for many of them to get. I think some of the other data points would be feasible, but I am assessing it kind of with each practice.
Kristen, it's Melissa, just to jump in. I know that on a different call, this was discussed around some other issues, and practices were kind of concerned about keeping that data. And I guess there's been some pushback from patients and families when they're trying to collect some of that data too. So I'm not sure, like I know Dr. Zimnick's on the call, like what they do in their practice, but I know some of the practices who run a completely different call from me said they get very concerned about collecting DEI data on their own. And so in the past, when they've had to look at things like this, it's been more reported to them from, it must be insurers who are reporting it, because it's not something they'd collect like on a routine, you know,
Right.
wild child. They don't just have that data on hand. So to go and then try to collect it on this, if it was part of a screening tool, I mean, you could obviously ask the question then, but collecting it from a baseline, they were like, we don't collect DEI because we're concerned that we could be targeted for, you know, why we're collecting it, what we're doing with that data and that information. And it can be somewhat of a trigger, especially as we're learning, you know, how those questions are asked.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone on the call from ODH can speak to if we would be able to omit that data from reporting, or what kind of the thoughts are about that.
I don't know about omitting the data or what we can do there, just because I haven't done this with you guys before. But I thought, is it Melissa? I thought you had some really good points around that I hadn't really thought about before. Do you think that it would be difficult? The question above it here, the primary language, not English. Have you had any feedback on that?
I haven't heard specifics on that. I can ask about that. Again, though, I think it's sort of, is that data really being collected, or where is it being collected? And then how can it get sort of pulled back out in terms of these patients that are having vision screening? So I think that's some of the challenge with some of these pieces of data, but I can ask specifically about that one.
Okay.
Kristen, as a thought on a reverse, just thinking process, you know, we're asking 3 separate questions of like, what is the percentage of those received who are white, who are Black, who are other? What if you asked the question of what was the racial distribution of those that were not screened? Only thought would be that that population should be much, much smaller, to where even if you had to do a hand pull, you would be able to do it easier. Still may not be helpful in this, because it does depend on if they're asking that question.
Right.
Ethnicity in EPIC is a discrete data point, which can usually be pulled if the practice is willing to disclose, and if they are asking. The question though too is that a lot of times, if you have someone doing registration, they will assume a race instead of asking, because they're not trained well in how to ask the racial ethnic questions appropriately. So they'll just assume a race and put something in. They've never actually really asked. So how accurate that data really is also questionable.
Yeah, and I know that David had scheduled us for sort of a more extensive data discussion tomorrow, which that might be a meeting that Allison is able to join. David, I don't know if you can tell who's accepted that or not.
Yeah, from what I can tell, I think she's able to, unless, you know, Molly, if you know otherwise, but it looked like that time worked.
Yeah, she'll be on tomorrow.
Okay, so maybe we can sort of finalize thoughts or kind of our next steps for the data piece tomorrow. Any more thoughts or comments about this type of data? And like I said, I think there may be some practices where we're able to get this. I mean, particularly the ones who have resources in their IT world that can take a look at this and kind of set up reporting. So like I said, I feel like Dayton might be able to do it based on my conversations with them. It just may take a bit of time to get it set up. Okay.
And I just saw Cindy's message about talking tomorrow with the data. So we will definitely do that, Cindy. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. And then other question, you know, I know from previous waves and then also with the current practices, I mean, many of them are not completing Form K. And I know that that's been one of the goals of the project and one of the things that we've talked about. Is that form available only paper-wise? Is there a digital way to complete the form? I just want to kind of get an idea of what all the options are for that, and then think through, like, to have success with that, how we might factor that in for practices. I know we talked about it with Dayton a bit yesterday when we were there.
Kristen, can you remind me what Form K looks like?
So it's fairly simple and straightforward. It's really the form that basically when the family has the vision screening completed at the pediatrician's office, they can take it back to the school to say, we've completed this and it's done. David, please chime in because you're much more expert on that than I am.
No, that's exactly what that is. And we could probably also tomorrow bring that up with with Allison as well to see, you know, about making that form online fillable versus just having PDFs of it available.
Yeah, I just was thinking about it, and I know I don't want to lose sight of it because I know it's been something that's important to the project. And I think practices do struggle with doing that and incorporating that into a workflow. So any ways that we can think about to make that easier is kind of what I was thinking about. Does that make sense, Dr. Zimnick?
Yes, thank you, Molly. She pulled it in. I pulled it up. Yeah, that one's gonna be a hard.
It's tough. Yeah, it is really tough in primary care.
Yeah, because it's definitely something that because this is meant, in your intent is meant to be sent to back with every patient that has this completed, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I believe so.
good luck with that one. Now to have it to send back to those that have failed their school hearings and vision, and sending it back for those that had failed a screen, definitely, I think you could successfully achieve. Filling this out for every kid that you do a vision screening that they pass on, I'm not going to be optimistic, and I'm going to be honest. That's going to be a big lift, and that's a big ask of practices when no one else necessarily wants that information.
Yeah, and so it might be helpful too to understand kind of how that is used. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if a practice completes that and gives that to the family and it takes it back to the school, what happens next from that?
Well, and who's requesting it? Is the school actually requesting this form, or is it something we're giving to the school and the school could care less? Because they're not going to like do a vision screening on all of the second grade and say, oh, but these 5 people that have forms completed don't have to be screened. That takes more time than just screening all of the second graders and running them in and doing a vision screen. So I'm not sure how the school is going to be using this unless there's an issue, and then this is to confirm that there is no vision screening because there's proof that we as providers have done the screen and feel that it's okay. So a better understanding of what the value of the form is will help you elicit buy-in from the practices to use it.
Well, it is my understanding. I mean, I'm not sure how realistic it is in practice, but my limited understanding is that yes, that's what the schools want it for, so they know whether or not they need to even be screening those kids and whether they've gotten a screening or not.
Which schools are using it? Do we know? Do we know if the schools in the practice areas are using it?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I know that obviously ones that we're training on the children's vision screen training we're providing it for, but I don't know in terms of usage rates.
I mean, that would be helpful because if you absolutely knew that Dayton Public use this information in this way, that would be a bigger argument than saying that a parent's going to walk out and throw it away like they do everything else we give them. Having it digital would help because you could put it into My Kids chart and then the parent could send it to the school or to the eye doctor or wherever. So digital would help make it more usable.
Yeah, that was my first thought, that if it was digital, we might actually have somewhat of a shot, at least at some of the practices, to try to get it incorporated.
Yeah.
So for follow-up on that, is that something we also need to discuss with Allison?
I think so. I think we need a better understanding of if the schools are actually using this, because the idea of adding more paperwork to a private practice that's not valuable to the parent or the school or the provider. If it's just nice to have, that's not valuable. Just nice to have will never happen because it's going to be so random that it won't be useful in the public health type setting anyways. But if we can generate the need and the value of this form, then we would have a shot at pushing it. Else, I think if I would not necessarily stress tons of effort on this, because else we're going to lose sight of actually getting the kids screened. I'd rather have them screened and screened well than have this form filled out if I have to make a choice.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted I think this is all really great feedback. And I think maybe a brief conversation with Allison tomorrow, but it's definitely, I would like to see if the schools even care about it. If it is 5 students that they're not going to have to screen, then, if that's nothing to them, like you said. Yeah, so I think a little bit more on the school's end, and really good feedback. Thank you.
All right, that sounds good. And I think today will probably be a bit shorter since we will be talking about the data more in depth tomorrow. But for next steps, we definitely want to check in with some of the schools in the areas that we're doing the project and see if these forms are being used. So we can definitely do that. And any other next steps or other items that folks wanted to touch on today before we talk about data more in depth tomorrow?
Just real quick, just one question in terms of the developing the data reporting plan template. Is that still is that a little bit further down the road?
Well, I think until we kind of get this question sort of answered. Yes.
Right,
I mean, I think
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have an idea or a sort of a working draft of that, but that will have to be finalized, I think, after we have this conversation. And
Sure.
then I want to present, like I said, present that to each practice. And the thing I don't want to do is I don't want to scare practices off with huge data requests. Because like I said, I think, and even if there's ways that, because some of this data reporting, it takes a bit of time to get set up. So understanding that even for practices who might be able to do it, it may not be something that they're going to be able to report to us for the month of March. It may be something that we get more toward the end of the project. And I know that's not ideal, but we're really not running sort of a 9-month quality improvement collaborative where we're doing that monthly data at this point because of the length of time of the project. So that's sort of the bigger idea that I wanted to talk about when we have Allison with us as well. And also, I think the idea of, if we have a practice like Peds on Wheels that is not able to give all of this data, what can we work with them on providing that would be acceptable? Because I think like that practice, that's a good practice for us to work with. They have very high volume. They have a high volume of Medicaid patients, and they also have a lot of ethnic diversity in their practice. So we definitely want to keep them in the project. I just don't want the data reporting to be a barrier.
Along those lines, I mean, I think the main thing is to really get the percentage of kids that we attempt to screen and those that were successful. I mean, those are the two pieces of information. The rest is demographics and more of a deeper data dive. But really,
Yes.
the big question is who's eligible to be screened, who's getting screened, and who was successfully screened. And I think those three pieces of information always have to take precedent, and then the details within it are secondary. Now, obviously, the secondary details help bring some really good light onto different things. But if we can get that first 3 steps up to 100%, then we don't have to worry about the rest because we know it's all fixed. We're getting all of that diversity. We're not having any barriers. If we can hit 100% up, then we're good. We really only need to know the other pieces on the failures, on what's not happening versus getting that done. So I think if we keep that in mind, looking at the data, I think that may simplify it for practices so that they really practices get sucked into the weeds. They see this list of 25 things. They're like, oh no, we can't do that. Well,
yeah,
really,
it gets overwhelming.
It does. So there's 3 things. How many are eligible? How many did you screen? How many were successful? That's the 3 key pieces. If we can get those key pieces, the rest we can work with figuring out on a later step. Or if you're only hitting 75%, really sometimes all you need is to figure out a deep dive into that 25% of what wasn't working. Is it all your 3-year-olds? Is it all your Hispanic families? Is it all the language barrier kids?
Right.
That's the piece that, and I think we have to, when we explain all this data stuff to practices, we really have to keep it simple and not let them get sucked into that list of pieces of data and sucked into that weeds, because then practices are just going to run away because that's too overwhelming. I mean, I'm a data nerd, so I really love getting into all those details. But but from a practical standpoint, we want to take care of the kid. We want the kid screened for vision to make sure we can catch anything that we can catch and make sure this kid's set up for success. Those 3 pieces of information is what we need to do that. The rest is bonus, so we can help those kids that we're missing. So I think if we keep that in mind, I think that will be helpful to the practices.
Yes. Yep, agree. And David, I know we had one follow-up item from Dayton Children's too, who had followed up with us with the question, I think about instrument-based screening. It sounded to me like maybe they were thinking about doing that with some of their older population. I'm glad they reached out and were asking questions because I know we wanted to make sure we gave them good information about approved equipment versus equipment that's not the best to purchase.
And they were looking at also younger than age 3. They were looking at interested in photo screening devices, and my guess is they had come into contact with either Optech or with Spot.
Right. That's what I was thinking too. So I think just the most up-to-date information on what ODH recommends for that, we can provide that information to them.
Can you copy me on that? Because 10 to 1, they'll corner me, and it'd be nice for me to know what you have told them, so I can be on the same page. Because I haven't seen the most recent one. I have the initial recommendations, but I'm not sure if they've changed since the last couple of years when I've read through the photo screening recommendations recently.
Yes. And Kira did put a comment in addition to the 3 items, Dr. Zimnick, that you mentioned, the referred after a child does not pass a screening is a critical piece of data.
Kira, you're absolutely correct. I missed that point, but
Yeah.
yes, you're 100% correct.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. And appreciate you all again taking some time to join us tomorrow. I think our call is scheduled for 30 minutes tomorrow on the data piece, but I'll try to summarize or add some of this discussion to the slides so that we're kind of up to date just on what we discussed today when we talk a little bit more in depth about it tomorrow. All right. Thank you again so much. Thanks for all those thoughts and input. And we will talk to you tomorrow. Bye, Kira. Thanks again.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Zimnick.